right, let's jump right into it. Thanks everybody for attending episode 20 of Let's Talk Recruiting. Today's topic is going to be 5 reasons why my managers love me. And I think that's a goal of every recruiter, to get those managers to love you. In my experience, it sort of seemed like it's been a case by case. You have to win each one by one. So we have on with us today 5 panelists to share their reasons and their experiences with us. It's mostly an East Coast presence today. Not sure why that is, but that's what it is. We have Justin Rowland out of Raleigh. We have Diane Mariuza. Did I get that right, Diane?
Yeah.
All right, first. And John Przybylak.
Shabilik.
Shoot, sorry.
We use the Polish pronunciation, so.
Got it. Wait, say that again. Say your name again.
Shabilik.
Okay, I never would have gotten that one. And Sheridan King from Washington, D.C., and Catherine Davidian out of New York City also. And I am out of the L.A. area. So with that said, we're going to go through their topics. Hopefully we'll have some time to sort of touch base on some of the input that attendees gave when they registered. I do want to kind of highlight before we get into the nitty gritty, looking at the input that the attendees gave, it kind of, for me, kind of fell into 4 buckets: follow through, being responsive, being transparent, and being trusted. To me, those are a lot of those intangibles that recruiters and leaders sort of bring to the game at their piece. So it was never time to fill or any type of use of tools or anything like that. So it's really that the human touch that I saw were the reasons that keep coming in. So with that said, Justin, I am going to jump over to you and have you start with your item.
Yeah, I hope everyone's doing great today. I wanted to introduce myself quickly. Justin Rowland, sales recruiter for NetApp. I cover Latin America, Canada, and most of our overlay functions here in the U.S. from a sales standpoint. Came from the agency side, was there for a few years, came to NetApp in a few different functions, going from sourcing for sales to university relations roles, and then back to the sales side as a recruiter. Wanted to talk about a few of the key points that I see that make me successful and my peers that seem to have the most success. And as Sean was reiterating, yeah, you know, systems and tools are something that we all live with, and it's great to be an expert in those things that augment what your capabilities. But at the same time, as we all know, those things do change. Those things are ever evolving, and you know they're going to have their own issues that you sometimes have to deal with. But really, for me, I feel that you know having a sense of urgency, having a way of prioritizing, as we all know, you know the most important things in our day are always going to be offers first, and then you know, going to interviews and candidate engagement, and then just being data driven. You know, a lot of times, you know, you can be available and you can be very responsive and you can prioritize, but if you don't have the data that is needed to help your hiring managers drive their decisions, it's kind of all for naught, because then you're looping back in someone from, you know, whether an HR business partner, finance, et cetera, rather than having that data and those philosophies readily at hand to quickly answer those questions in a concise manner to make decisions, especially in a competitive landscape. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to add into that. Sean, I know we got a short amount of time here.
Yeah, so I'll add a question back to you around the data and having those answers. Kind of like what I've experienced is, hey, if you can stay ahead of the game with information, right, answer the question before it's asked. Are you using your data and your awareness around that area to kind of build that relationship with the managers, kind of staying ahead of the game, for lack of better words?
Well, it's really understanding not just what you have, say, from a leveling standpoint, but what the local market might be, what you're seeing out there in terms of pursuit of folks. So, for example, I hire like a lot of solutions engineers. And if I'm hiring someone in New York City, Bellevue, or Sunnyvale versus some lesser cost markets, even though we don't adjust from that in a salary band standpoint for sales, we still have to understand there is going to be an adjustment. So we are going to have to kind of think of creative ways to pull additional levers and be prepared to know kind of what those stopgaps are from an HR perspective, so we can determine, you know, who is actually a viable candidate and if we have the ability to actually close on them, or if it's going to be something that's kind of not going down that path because we know it's going to be something that's unnatural. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Do you do intake meetings with your managers?
For the most part, unless it's something that it's a manager I've worked with for years and it's kind of the same type of profile. Sometimes those things do change. Again, going back to that kind of sense of urgency, which goes back into, communication and being readily available. I talk to my managers pretty consistently on an ad hoc basis. It's just quickly as, picking up the phone, sending an email, text. I kind of know what their form of communication that works best for each of those managers. So, I will quickly maybe ping them and say, hey, is this typically what we hired, John Smith for in the last role? And if so, I already kind of know what I'm looking for, so that makes it easy. But other than that, newer managers definitely like to lay, obviously, process, make sure that they agree with the thought process behind how we put that together, and we're adhering to whatever timelines they might have, because, again, there's a lot of variability. Some people might want to slow roll things. They have someone kind of quote unquote earmarked for a role and don't know how to handle that in terms of being compliant and doing the right thing. And then, of course, sometimes it's the latter, right, where they want to move as quickly as possible because they don't know if the rec will be here 2 weeks from now.
So I think that sort of follows through on your point of urgency, correct?
Yes, but urgency, but obviously with the right data, so you're not making quick decisions that end up putting you in a worse spot than you started off in.
Gotcha. Does any of the panel members want to add to that or comment?
Well, I'll just jump in on the intake piece of it, because I know for us, we do have a lot of the positions that we recruit for, more than once in different parts of the country. And so even if we don't do a formal intake because we've worked on that position before with that particular manager, we'll still have a brief intake, like just a reminder, this is the role. This is what the comp range is, going through some of the process that we're going to go through and just laying it all out, setting out expectations. The biggest thing is setting out expectations from the very beginning, and then following up and having, following through with your communication and being transparent through the process. And that's what helps in terms of building that trust across the board. But it is setting all the right expectations up front in terms of process and communications.
Excellent. Excellent. Anybody want to add to that, or Justin, are you good on that one?
Yeah, I would agree. That's definitely a good process to have. As you were mentioning there, you could tell someone something 100 times, but 3, 6, 9, 12 months goes by and they forget everything you discussed. So definitely good practice to have is the intakes when you can. So I definitely would agree with that as well.
Yeah, I've kind of done some reporting around like the average hiring that a manager does, and unless you get into those evergreen roles, it's kind of surprisingly low, the number of touch points, and this could be different for any company, right, or every company, the number of touch points, i.e. recs, that come in from a manager in a year's time. I was always sort of surprised on how low that number was across the board. So it's like building that relationship when you meet with somebody, fill that rec, and then it's 8 months later where you see them again for the second time or what have you. So I always thought it was interesting to reconnect where you were before and to maintain that relationship. Never seemed like it was an easy thing to do if you're not having repetitive engagement with the managers. All right, fantastic. Diane, let's sort of jump over to you and your item.
Hi, I'm Diane Mariuzza. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition for a New York City-based real estate company. We are a private company with 500 employees, so I am the only TA person in the company. I think the biggest hurdle that I've worked with is trying to be part of the business. When we do an intake meeting, I make sure that I familiarize myself with everyone in the leadership, as well as the managers, all the way down to the staff. It's easier for me to do that in a 500 employee company, but I get to know them both professionally as well as personally. So if they have any team meetings, if they have any social gatherings, I try to make sure that I'm involved in that, so that I'm able to get to know the business as much as possible. I make it a point during the intake meetings to give them a timeline of realistically how long it will take to get someone hired. So a lot of the hiring managers that I work with think that we can have someone in place in 2 weeks, and that's just not possible. For the type of positions that we work on, in the company that I'm in, there's a lot of competition in the New York City metro area for real estate. And so there's a lot of competing offers. There's a lot of people that accept our offers and then get another competing offer. So what I like to do is also get a team in place that is sort of a recruiting liaison. So we have someone that is works with me with the daily review of resumes, someone that works with me in terms of when we actually do if they were on-site interviews or phone interviews now. Each person has a specific role during the interview process where someone is determining, the technical capabilities. Someone else is determining the culture, and someone's doing the sale part. Up until the point where we make an offer, I have someone involved on the team that reaches out to the candidate and will answer any questions or follow up or do anything like that. So the biggest, I think the most effective way to be a good recruiter is to involve the team in the recruiting process.
Interesting. I'd love to hear when recruiters or TA leaders get involved in those group team meetings. I've yet to see a recruiter that does go to team meetings that has a bad relationship with their team, with the hiring team, because they're just involved in, if there are any issues, it kind of gets resolved. So to me, that's sort of like a checklist. Are you bonding with your hiring team? Do you or do you not go to those team meetings? I know there are times where you can't, especially if you're a recruiter working a huge rec load. Whenever possible, that's one thing that I recommend. You want to build a relationship, show up their team meetings, because you're kind of hitting a bunch of birds with one stone if everybody's in that team meeting. It seems to do really well around tech hiring too. I don't know if that's just unique to that group. Excellent. Does anybody want to add any piece to that, to Diane?
Also, I just want to mention, we do some campus recruiting, not a lot, but we do some of that. And that is a huge opportunity to get people to get more involved, because everyone at my company, they love doing campus recruiting. I don't know why, but they love going on campus. They love meeting students. They love being involved in the process. And that's another opportunity to get to know people, is actually when you go to schools or you do campus recruiting, you get to understand a little bit more about the business and have them collaborate a little bit more with some recruiting.
Does it matter which school? Do you go to alumni? Like they had to be alumni at that school, or does that not matter?
We try. Since we're in New York City, there are specific schools that have real estate majors and real estate programs. So we tend to go there. And that's where a big pool of our candidates come from anyway. So yes, a lot of them are alumni. So that works out very well.
I've been involved in biotech and entertainment, where that alumni status, they love going back to their school, like for a film school or a science school. They're always easy to find volunteers, basically. Hit your calendar, you're good. I do want to add one piece of it to your segmenting piece, although it has nothing to do with getting hiring managers to love you. I've only seen it a very few times where you kind of segment duties within a TA in-house team. I've seen nothing but great results when you segment across the board, because I do a lot of reporting and metrics. But when I see segmentation, all the good numbers go up and all the bad numbers go down in the right direction. So does anybody else, kind of just so we touch on that really quick, does anybody else segment at their team? Justin?
We've tried to for the most part. I'm probably the one that overlays across way too much. So to Diane's point, that's what I've always missed in my career at NetApp. I've never been focused in one group where I can be involved with all their meetings and build deep relationships and really, really understand all aspects of the business. So I kind of piecemeal things that I get along the way just from talking with hiring managers and attending, a one-off meeting here and there, but supporting 17 different groups, that's really impossible for me to get that segmentation and that focus on one group. Yes, it gives me a holistic view of the company, but I really don't have that intimate, deep understanding of each segment because I'm just spread too thin. But we do have folks that have been segmented for years, and they've been very successful based on knowing all the ins and outs, things that are coming, trends, all these other things that help benefit that segmentation.
And sort of staying on point with our topic, it does allow that person who's got that segment of hiring manager relationships to really go deep on that piece of it. So it seems like it comes down to time. And if I had the time, I would do it perfectly. It's just a matter of finding that time. Catherine, did you want to add on there?
Sure. So yeah, actually, MasterCard, we have segmented our teams. Actually, I'm part of the Ops and Tech recruiting practice at MasterCard. I'm actually one of the tech leads, talent acquisition tech leads. I sit in the New York office, but we have a lot of presence out in O'Fallon. But yeah, I agree with you. I think when you have a specific group that you manage day in and day out, it's a lot easier to build those relationships. Such as myself, I support our digital network services space. So, you know, that interaction with hiring managers on a weekly basis is something that I can offer to them. And with that, I just want to just add to, you know, how we were talking about the intake meetings, you know, how important they are. I would also like to add that I think that follow-up call, what I normally do will put a weekly recurring meeting invite with my hiring leaders that I'm working on a rec with. So that way we have a touch point every week. And that is just as important to keep those hiring managers, you know, involved and, you know, in their face to make sure that they know we are working on their requirements and, you know, we need the same dedication and focus from them as well to make sure we fill those roles.
Excellent. Anybody want to add to Diane's piece?
I would just say, well, I was just going to say in the segmenting, we do not necessarily from the TA team itself, but when we're working with our hiring teams, because of what we do in public accounting, we sort of segment and give everybody a part to play on the hiring team. So we'll specifically, you know, we help them in terms of interviewing, we'll outline their steps for like, you know, in our pre-brief and then our debrief, and then we'll have people with responsibilities that are on that hiring team for like pre-offer, post-offer, et cetera, all so that we can get hopefully that offer acceptance and get that person, you know, in for onboarding. So, I mean, we have our own segment, which is a little bit more than we would want to go into on this call, but we segment it a little bit in terms of what we ask from the hiring teams when we go through the process.
Gotcha. All right, John, we're going to jump over to you.
Awesome. Yep. So just a little background about myself. I've been in this business for 14 years altogether, recruiting. Recently, I started with a new company called Commissioning Agents Incorporated. So we're in the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical space. We provide consulting services. So I recruit nationally. There's 6 different groups that I work with spread out throughout the country and all the major biopharma hubs. There's 3 of us in talent acquisition. I guess I'm the senior technical recruiter here. So, you know, to answer the questions directly, why the hiring managers love me, I like to take a customer service oriented approach to my style and really understand what the hiring managers are looking for. So I guess I can draw on a recent experience here, just because, you know, being 5 months in, you know, I got to really, you know, build these relationships from ground up. So, you know, it was a lot of just, you know, intake calls, you know, weekly, bi-weekly, understanding what works well in their groups, understanding the personalities of their groups, the little cultures within their groups, because what might work out east won't work out west or the Midwest or in the Pacific Northwest. So it varies, right? So you have to understand, you know, what works well within their groups, what they're looking for. And really it all comes down to becoming like an indispensable resource for them. So in other words, they can't live without your presence. So it's really rolling your sleeves up, you know, getting the work done, you know, and presenting resumes, and then getting feedback on them, you know, what don't you like, what do you like about this particular candidate? So, you know, it's really over communication is really what it comes down to. You have to make sure that you're reliable. They can rely on you for your opinion because you're sort of a consultant to them. And the way I look at it is they're a customer of mine. So, you know, you want to approach them with consideration. You want to be kind to them. You're going to have some conflict, but I think when you come out of that conflict, you're going to have more credibility and it's going to build character too. So you want them to view you as a, you know, a required piece of the puzzle, you know, that they're not going to be able to really operate without you. So that's honestly how I approach these hiring manager relationships. And it's worked really well for me. I mean, we're all in the customer service business, and it all comes down to fulfilling the roles, but it's the journey that gets there is really what it's all about. So.
Yeah, one sort of principle rule that was given to me many, many years ago to kind of live by, and I was told to be the guy that answers his phone. It came down to like being that simple and being that support. And the goal was if you're by your phone and you're not on it and somebody calls, it never goes to voicemail, just to be into that responsive and support piece of it. You ever heard that phrase?
Yeah, Sean, I think it's counterintuitive in a sense because, I mean, listen, 90 to 95% of the time we're chasing hiring managers down, right? So, but if you're not there in that 5 to 10% of the time, it's just not a good look. So, I mean, you have to have a level of self accountability. And again, I think that goes with being, it's one of the ingredients of being indispensable, for the hiring managers you're working for. So, yeah.
Gotcha. And kind of jumping back to what I brought up with Justin about being ahead of the question. Is that kind of something that you use in the practice of managing your own desk?
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. We, in the past, I haven't used it here, but as far as data, we like to use like the supply and demand analytics. I know LinkedIn has the recruitment insight or talent insights, I think it's called. I use those to craft discussions around, if they're looking for a hard to fill kind of role, you have to be real with them and say, hey, you're not going to get that person in 2 weeks. I think Diane mentioned it earlier. So, being realistic with them and having conversations around that. And again, that helps you stay ahead of the curve, so you're setting those expectations. So they know not to expect an offer that's going to go out maybe 2 weeks. It might take 2 months, right? So yeah, I mean, staying ahead of the game is for sure part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of going along with what Catherine had said is things that I put into the practice. And again, I haven't worked at desk for a long time. I've been recruiting operations for most of my recruiting life, in that consistency of Monday morning updates. So every manager knows what's going on, or every recruiter, every staffing leader knows what's going on in their entire rec load each Monday morning through a good, organized, visually informational report that goes out each Monday to kind of try and stay ahead of it. And it just shows all the work that's been done and where everything, the statuses are. So I think, John, to your point, it follows that guideline.
Definitely.
That type of piece. All right. And anybody want to add to John's piece? Got it. Yeah, I think that just sort of sums up a lot of it, of being that, if you combine it all, being that professional, but being that true partner in the game, so to speak. All right, Sheridan, let's sort of jump over to you.
All right. So my name is Sheridan King. I am a recruiting team manager at RSM. We're the number 5 accounting firm in the world. And I work with our experienced hire audit team as well as our internal client service team supporting the US and Canada. And I have a team of 8. And then I have my own set of recruiting responsibilities too. So I get sort of the harder to fill niche jobs that no one else wants to take at the firm. So for when I saw this topic, why hiring managers love me, I was thinking really in terms of my team. I get a lot of feedback from the hiring managers that we work with, and what really is important to them. And I mean, communication is sort of sums it up, but it does mean so many things. It's being a good partner, being consultative, listening. So it's communication both ways, having good follow-up, having a plan in place. You guys have all said it, having a plan in place from the beginning, setting expectations. This is what we're going to do. And then if you can't follow through with those steps, just being transparent and honest about that. So if you're recruiting for a challenging role and the market is super tight, or you just are having trouble finding candidates, talking to your hiring partners about that. Not shying away from sticking to your check-in dates. If you set a biweekly or a weekly communication schedule, depending on the role, sticking with that. And if you don't have any real update, when you need to talk to somebody, giving them an update as to why. I've had 9 candidates decline to talk to me on LinkedIn, and I've had 6 of these people have gotten jobs, and walking through and figuring out how and coming with a recruiting strategy. This is what I could use from you as a recruiting partner, but just communicating every step of the way and involving your hiring managers is what I hear, positive and constructive feedback from the hiring managers that we work with what they like to see from us as a team and where we can always fix things. And it always comes down to, that back and forth communication, and, being honest. They appreciate that. They would, rather than you ghosting them or not following up with them because you don't have good news, it's following up with, good, bad, or otherwise news. And the same goes for candidates. We sometimes have a very long recruiting process, and we'll hear from hiring partners that people that we ultimately hire said our communication with them, letting them know that we, what our process is from step one to, the final step was key. We didn't sugarcoat anything. We were transparent about the process as a whole. And I saw a question pop up. How do you deal with unresponsiveness from hiring managers if you're recruit? I will answer that. So most of my team works remotely. And so we're all working for different locations, some people to go into the office. And it just is a matter of following through. And I've had to say to hiring managers, I'm sorry to gently stalk you, but I need an answer. So it's, an email. I'll add a calendar item on their calendar to talk if they're not responding via email. If I have their cell, I'll send them a text and say, hey, I just need to follow up on you on XYZ. And a lot of times what will be helpful is putting a time limit in there. I need to talk to you by tomorrow at 4 p.m. Or, I'm going to have to let this candidate go. And oftentimes having that kind of communication is what will get them to respond when you tell them you're going to release a candidate, or you're not going to source for candidates for them anymore until you talk to them.
Interesting. So Sharon, it sounds like you have like that ad hoc issue arose. You got that covered and how to address with that. Do you do any type of consistency around that type of messaging? And I'll give you an example. This was many years ago. The guy was at Microsoft. And he had a routine where he would do his hiring manager submits on a Monday. If he didn't get response by Thursday, he'd take him off the board. And every manager knew that's the way he worked. So he had this ongoing consistency. He must have been really good because he got away with it. He could do it. So you got to deliver on that. But have you ever seen anything like that where hey, I need responsiveness and this is the timeline that we're all going to work together on? Have you ever seen anything like that, or anybody for the panel on that?
Yeah, I mean, in our peak recruiting season, I'll use audit, for example, it is somewhat cyclical. And in some of our higher demand markets, so say San Francisco, we know that we have to have responses back from the hiring managers in a certain period of time. So ahead of, when we will lay it out in our intake, we're going to get you the submittal. We don't necessarily do it on a certain day of the week, but because we'll do it as we get candidates in. But we'll say, I'm going to follow up with you in 24 hours and need to know if you want to go ahead and set up a screen. So we'll next step and set a certain time. And I found even before, I was in staffing for a long time before I came to RSM, and staffing even more so, you have to set deadlines. I need to hear from you by X time, or we're going to let this candidate go. So that worked really well from a staffing perspective. And we do that at RSM too, in setting schedules.
And to me, that kind of falls under transparency. Hey, this is the way the world works in getting the people that you want. Anybody else I want to add to Sheridan's? No? All right, good. We're in the essence of time. Catherine, no rush, just getting right to you. Let's sort of jump over to you and to your item.
Great, thank you. So I already had introduced myself. I'm with MasterCard. I support one of our larger tech teams. I would say why managers love me. Well, the one thing I want to point out, recruiting definitely starts from the top up, right? So, without those hiring managers' engagements, where would we be? But I mean, everybody else has really kind of added to, the intake calls, the updates. I just think, that consistency, the consistency of us, staying connected with them, building those relationships. And I think when we are consistent, we are constantly following up, that's where that trust comes in, right? They trust us, they want to continue working with us. I love the way John had added, you know, being inexpensible. I feel the same way, you know, if you're inexpensible, then you know, they're going to want to continue working with you, and they're going to want to, I think when managers, when you're building those relationships and you have that trust factor, it's much easier to present those candidates. You don't, you know, as well, they, you know, the candidate, when you introduce a new candidate, they're immediately ready to interview them when you have that trust level, right? Instead of having to, you know, push candidates, they'll say, let's go interview them right away. So, I mean, it sounds like everybody else has really added that, what I was going to say. So, yeah, no, I feel the same way everybody else does.
Okay, then let me ask you a question kind of in the spirit of partnership, and this sort of goes out to the panel. Does anybody, like recruiters obviously are so engaged on the front end of hiring, does anybody do any like 90-day follow-ups with their hires or partake in their first year anniversary in any way? And again, it comes back down to time. So it really is kind of around those key critical hires or the long hire that took forever to get done, but you finally got it done. Do you do any type of after the fact engagement, like after they've been hired and they've been around? Do you touch base after the fact?
That's a great question. I usually do about a weekend, but other than that, it would, you know, once a candidate is hired, that usually falls into like an HR business partner role to continue that consistent check-in with them. When I worked on the agency side, I always did one final check-in before those 90 days was up, just to make sure everything was good. But yeah, no, I think that falls more on HR.
Diane, were you going to say something?
We do a 30 and a 90-day survey. So I send it out, it comes out from talent acquisition to the new hire after 30 days. And then once it goes into the 90-day time period, then HR business partners take it over. But I still keep a relationship with the new hires up until, you know, I'm their contact for the first, you know, few months. And we definitely capture any issues that come up on the survey with any sort of recruiting issues or, you know, the position not being realistic, it wasn't a realistic overview during the interview process. We get that feedback.
I knew, I did a project at a hedge fund company and there were two recruiters there. They kind of got hired in from their own headhunting firm. They got hired to be in-house to solely focus on finance people for this hedge fund. And they would do that 30-day follow-up, take them out to lunch, kind of to your point, make sure what they were selling was the right job that they did. But more importantly, they were networking with them. They would use that lunchtime to, hey, you like it here? Great. Let's talk about people you've worked with before in the finance industry. So they would kind of, again, get to that two birds with one stone piece of it. I just thought that was a great idea and a great draw. I think that came back from their headhunter days where they had to do that type of stuff, but they just brought it into the in-house world to get into that unique niche industry or what have you. And they built up the biggest Rolodex that I've ever seen. They knew everybody. It was bizarre how well connected they were, but they kept adding to that. Does anybody want to add? Does anybody else sort of get involved in those? I get the surveys and piece. I think I met one person who would do the year anniversary. Hey, are you available for lunch? I'll meet you, you know, for coffee if the organization had a cafe or what have you. Again, coming back down to time, keeping it simple for that piece of it. But does anybody else ever do that follow-up?
We don't do a formal like 30, 60, 90, but normally we will do a 30 and then a 90, and our recruiters do a pretty good job of keeping in touch as somebody you know, gets ramped up. A lot of it is for just what you said, employee referral purposes. So, you know, if somebody's come on board, we want to see if they, you know, are happy, how did they enjoy the recruiting process, and we have a pretty robust employee referral program. So we are, you know, if they're happy, we want to talk to them about referrals that they have as well. And we also do, within the first 30 days, we have what we call fast feedback. So our recruiting team will get a fast feedback out to them, just talking about their process as a whole. How did they, like, how was their candidate experience, et cetera. So we're, you know, we can always look to see what we can do to improve that candidate experience for them.
Justin, were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, that's a great takeaway I'm going to take with this. I usually average about 20 to 30 recs at a time and over 100 hires a year, and I'm down to like 5. So I definitely have more bandwidth to where I can start implementing that in my process and use that as a takeaway to, again, the networking piece is great for maybe potentials down the road that might be there, but again, just to make sure that they're happy that they weren't sold a bad bill of goods and something that helps to aid in their retention. And again, as we know, it's a thankless job. So a lot of times, once people are hired on, it's like, wait a second, who are you? And I'm like, the person that helped you get the job here. So it's nice to, maintain that connection and have that reciprocity for continuing to build that relationship.
Yeah, especially if you've done all your recruiting work these days off-site, where you literally never meet the person face-to-face or what have you. I would ask, did you bring the hiring managers there with you? And the answer is always, well, no, I wanted them to speak freely. And then if there was an issue that came out of that conversation, they'd bring it back, positive or negative, I guess, back to that manager. But I always thought, why not bring the manager there with them? And it was, no, I wouldn't do that. That's silly, Sean. So that's sort of an interesting take from it. Right. John, Catherine, anything to add on that?
No, I was going to say, Sean, so my previous company, we did a 30, 60, 90-day check-in. And then every milestone, 30, 60, 90 day, we'll get them like a swag item. It might be like an Amazon gift card, a mug or something like that. Here at my current company, I'll do it informally. Like I've only been here 5 months, right? I've hired quite a few people actually in the short time I've been here. So I'll check in with them periodically, but it's more of an informal setting. It's like, hey, how's it going so far? We're actually thinking about instituting like a customer or candidate survey experience. So we're going to probably get that rolling out here in the next 30, 60, 90 days. So we'll have a more formal mechanism to track it. And again, I think it's going to help with retention levels and everything like that. So I agree there.
Do you think something like that would be kind of handled by HR versus the recruiting team specifically?
Yeah, we're definitely going to have some inputs, but by and large, it's going to be handled by our HR group for sure.
You think that's good or bad?
I don't know. It's a good question.
I wouldn't want to pass the baton just yet, but that's like, just me.
Yeah, we're working it out, so to be determined.
Got it. Interesting. All right. We're going a little bit over, but does anybody have anything they want to add or any final comments or topics around the big picture? I know that this is the art of recruiting is in that relationship with the managers and the candidates, but truth be told, I think it has a lot more to do with these ongoing relationships with managers. They are the one that sign the checks. Anybody want to add anything generally speaking? No, we're good. All right. Well, hey, thank you everybody. And thank you for my last minute substitutes who sort of pitched in there. I'm learning that in a short week, calendars are tight. So I appreciate the stepping up and participating. Much appreciated. So with that said, thanks again, everybody, and enjoy your short week, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.